So welcome to the Arts and Science Exchange Orientation session. To begin our time together, I would like to acknowledge that Queen's University and Kingston are both situated on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee nations. And to reflect on this is to reflect on the longer history of this place, one that predates the earliest of European settlers' arrival. And when I reflect on this, I think about the role and the responsibilities that I carry as someone who identifies as a white settler woman. And I also think about it in connection with my work. My work is sending students to many different places around the world and bringing students from many different places around the world here to Kingston and here to Turtle Island. And I think that I have a great responsibility in encouraging students as they're participating in these international sojourns to think about their own identities and think about the lands that they're traversing to and through. So I would encourage you at the outset of your pre-departure preparations to do a bit of reflecting on that. You can start by reflecting on the land you're currently situated on. You can also engage in some research to understand the land that you're going to and possibly the history of that place. So you can ask yourself, is there Indigenous presence on this place? Are there Indigenous caretakers here? Has there been a history of colonization in this place? And what is my role, based on who I know myself to be, and coming as a guest to this place and into this community? So I would encourage you to think about these really important concepts and things in many different ways and carry those thoughts with you throughout the program and continue to do that reflecting. We will give you some other things to think about at this academic orientation as well. So as I mentioned earlier, we're very fortunate to have Dr. Aruna Makana here tonight, and she is going to be sharing with us some really helpful tips on making a successful transition on the exchange program. And after we've heard from Dr. Aruna Makana, you will be with me for the remainder of the hour, and we're going to talk all about academic planning for your upcoming Arts and Science exchange. And I just wanted to remind everyone that we recently had our OCASP Off-Campus Activity Safety Policy Town Hall. It was on March 13th, very well attended. So thanks to those who could make it. If you couldn't make it, don't worry. We've sent around the recording of that session with a short quiz, just so we can make sure that you captured all of the key things we're hoping you were taking away from that session. And of course, we have our very exciting Exchange Connect event coming up on March 23rd. So we just wanted to remind you of that too. Please do register for that event. It's a great way to connect with other students who studied abroad on the program before. Our goals for today's session are to help you develop a broad understanding of your journey on the Arts and Science Exchange program, to help you learn about the successful transitions you'll be making, both personal and academic, and of course to understand your pre-departure responsibilities. And we know that you're going to have some questions, which is fantastic. We hope you will. And we hope that you'll include those in the chat or use your microphone and speak verbally at the end of the orientation. And if you're finding you've got some really specific questions about your own circumstances, I would recommend that you book an appointment to speak with me separately. We can get into those details at that time. So please do throw your questions in the chat as we move through this so you don't forget. And we'll kick things off with successful transitions. And I just want to say again, a huge thanks to Aruna for being here. She's a huge part of making the exchange program successful. And we all really enjoy working with her. So thanks, Aruna, and over to you.
Hey, my pleasure. I too love working with the International Programs Office and all the students who go on exchange and come on exchange here. So thank you for this invite. Guess I'll just move on to the next slide. So I want to actually first begin by just complimenting all of you for the amazing resilience you're showing and this sort of growth mindset that we're living in this time of uncertainty. And I just love the feeling that you are making plans and keeping that open mind. So well done on that. Obviously, when people go on exchange, when they study abroad, it's an opportunity of a lifetime. Many of you came to Queen's planning exchange. You picked us because we have all these wonderful exchange opportunities. And I know that this is the highlight of a lot of people's undergraduate time at Queen's. So of course, studying abroad is going to provide you many wonderful opportunities and experiences. Next, please. But studying abroad can also be a time of challenge, and it can be stressful. Even the things that we love the most, any change causes some stress because it requires adjustments. So even things that we're really looking forward to can challenge our systems. And so we just want to give you a little bit of heads up on that. So studying abroad also adds that other layer of a cross-cultural adjustment. Even those of you who are going to more global north countries where the culture might be similar, the language is English, etc., spoken language, even those students tell us that there is a cultural adjustment to make. Things are different. So that can cause some challenges. Then, of course, this year it's COVID that's added this huge layer of uncertainty and stress. So we want you to know that while this is a wonderful experience planning and looking forward to things, it can be a time of challenge as well. Next, please. So why is that? First of all, whenever we go to a new environment, a new university, a different university, we do have to adapt to that place, both its academic culture, but also the social culture. Creating those new relationships, fitting in is huge. We've had students who've gone and sometimes feel very lonely and isolated. So we know that creating those connections, those social relationships is one of the adjustments that needs to be made. Independent living is another one. I know many of you have been living independently here at Queen's in Kingston, but when you're in another country, it's again that added layer of distance and different cultures. So more demands are placed in terms of independent living. Balancing socializing and working. I know many of you are going on a pass-fail exchange. For some of you, the marks may count. And what exchange students who go out on exchange tell us, and actually even the ones who come here, it's getting that balance between their academic work and socializing and travel that can be sometimes challenging. And then finally, managing money. You know, obviously when you're going on exchange, you want to be able to travel, and let's hope that's going to be the case. And that can cost money, so that can cause a bit of stress. Okay, next. You've heard of the concept of culture shock. So when we go to a new environment, initially it's exciting. We love the differences. We notice things. But after some time, people kind of get a bit tired. You move to that point too. We're just tired of having to adapt, to mentally translate ideas, to mentally translate in terms of even language sometimes. And that can get a little bit challenging. And people often report they sort of hit like a little bit of a low, as in point 3. But most people climb out of that as they become more familiar with their environment and resources and go on to have a wonderful exchange. Occasionally, very occasionally, people can get stuck at point 3 or 4, and they are not enjoying the exchange as much. And that's when it's time for you to contact Haley and connect with us, and we help you get through that period of culture shock. And of course, there might be resources in the university where you're going as well that are there for you to talk to their advisors and their people for culture shock. Okay, the next one, please. So believe it or not, students do get homesick and lonely. You know, you've been waiting to go away and go abroad, but people do get homesick. And we do miss our usual sources of support. Sometimes it's only when you leave them that you realize how important they are to you and how much we rely on them. So that can be an adjustment. And then for students who have had pre-existing mental health issues, such as anxiety or low mood or depression, issues with eating, any other sort of mental health issues, sometimes this change and the adjustment can bring those issues up again. I'm not saying this to scare you or to discourage you from going on exchange, not at all. All we're saying is do a little bit of planning and preparation. So if you've struggled with some issues, then talk to your counselors, talk to your psychologists or social workers or doctors, whoever you're working with, and just come up with a bit of a plan that if those things happen, what are the red flags? How are you going to catch this? And what are you going to do about it? So you're not just taken unawares. Next, please. Okay, so what's our advice? Talking to students, everyone tells us that really helps to stay connected with family and your friends back here. That doesn't mean you're going to spend all your time talking to them, doesn't mean you're going to talk every day, but it helps to have that connection. It also makes re-entry a little bit easier. Definitely try and stay connected with your own culture. Obviously, you're there to experience new cultures, and that's what you should be doing. But it should not be an either or. Like, I think it should be the new culture and then a bit of your own culture. So if you're fortunate enough to go on exchange with some other people that you know, then it's just nice to buddy up and have that, just to be able to support each other. And definitely stay connected with resources, because there's plenty of resources to help you through this process of adjustment. Next, please. Okay, so let's hope this doesn't happen. But if it happens, if you find yourself struggling in some way, the first thing to remember is that some of these struggles are what we call normal transition issues. Like I said, change requires adjustment. There is a transition period. And for most people, they generally wear off pretty quickly. Things do get better pretty quickly. It really helps if you're struggling to keep those lines of communication open. So contacting Haley, speaking to your advisors at the university that you'll be attending. And they are organized to be able to connect you with resources, to give you informal advice. And it's really helpful. I can attest to that. If you're beginning to struggle, it sort of helps to seek help early, because we can then prevent difficulties. Early intervention helps, rather than when things are really not working out. So that's just something to keep in mind. And if you're struggling, don't give into it, push back. And one of the things that people have found really helpful is engaging in extracurricular activities at that university. So participate in their sports, drama productions, any clubs, organizations, because that's going to help you build community and connections and really help with your transition. Next. Okay, so if you're struggling and you need our support, things have changed a little bit over the last couple of years. As I said, contact the International Programs Office, contact the local office at the university. Some universities have counseling services like we do, and they might be able to connect you with people there. If that's not possible, or there's a long waiting list, then maybe contact Haley, and then she reaches out to you and we give you advice. Now, the change that's happened is that under the new laws of practice, counselors, psychologists are not allowed to practice outside of the province of Ontario. In order to practice somewhere else, we have to get permission. We have to have somebody else that can take on things if things are challenging. So we are a little bit limited. However, contact Haley, she'll contact me, and we'll try to offer you some advice. We can consult with you informally to help you get through this process. Sometimes that's sufficient, but other times we may need to help you find other resources. Next, please. Oh, so I guess before we sort of launch into that, if you're not able to talk to a counselor at Student Wellness for the reasons I mentioned, the AMS has contracted to Empower Me, and they have jurisdiction outside of Ontario, outside of Canada. So again, as I said, if you're running into difficulties, contact the International Programs Office, and we will try and find the support that you need, okay? So with that, I'm going to wish you all the best, and let's fingers crossed that things open up and we all get to do the things we've been hoping to do in the fall.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Arunima. Does anyone have any questions for Arunima at this time? You can put them in the chat, or like we said, you can turn your mic on and ask that way. Also, we will be doing a follow-up email tomorrow. It's going to include the recording, and it's also going to include a link to Empower Me and some of the resources that Arunima has mentioned.
Okay.
So there's opportunity to follow up later on if needed. I'm not seeing any questions come in through the chat. So once again, Arunima, thank you so much for...
My pleasure.
All right.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. So we're going to make our own transition now into talking a little bit about academics and your upcoming exchange. And we just want to start off by saying a big congratulations. So what you'll see on the screen now is in tricolor, so in red, yellow, and blue, a congratulations word that's broken up in kind of loopy writing with an exclamation mark. And this is a big congratulations to you all from myself and the rest of the International Programs Office team. I know that there's several students here tonight who were supposed to be on exchange right now, but COVID-19 had a pretty big impact and obviously prevented that from happening, and are persevering, as Arunima was saying, through, and hopefully will be going out in the fall term. And there's students here who are maybe new to the exchange program and looking forward to an exchange next year as well. And you're all very welcome, and we look forward to working with you throughout your pre-departure preparation. So we want to start off, as you've probably noticed at some of our other events, with just a little bit of a caveat here with a reminder of our current circumstances with COVID-19. So while we remain hopeful that exchanges will proceed in the fall 2021 term, there remains the possibility that student mobility, including your exchange, could be suspended in 2021-22 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we want to, encourage you to continue to adhere to the guidance we've provided in the information sheet, in the exchange town hall recording that we sent you all, particularly around financial planning, and contact us if you have any questions. On the note of financial planning, the IPO's rule of thumb is that students should not be making any major exchange-related purchases until they have received their official letter of acceptance from their host university. So not the email that we sent you back in February. We're talking about you apply to your host university and then you get your acceptance letter. So that's kind of the benchmark there. And even after that point, given the COVID-19 situation, all of our guidance is saying not to make non-refundable or purchases that are not covered by or purchases that aren't going to be covered by your insurance. So please keep this in mind. We're sharing all of this advice with you with your best interests at heart. And if you feel confused or unsure of how to proceed at any time, reach out to our team and we'll give you some guidance. Now, we get to talk about your exchange tonight, which is one of my favorite things to talk about. I'm really excited for you all at the prospect of potentially being abroad later this year. So let's go over what exchange entails. And before we launch into this, I want to ask for you all to pull up the chat box on your Zoom. And I'm going to ask you a yes or no question just to get things rolling. So put a yes or a no for your answer in the chat. Have you studied abroad on an exchange before? Yes or no? No, yes, no, 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 no. Wow, you're all really fast. Holy smokes. Okay, so I am seeing majority no's, but I'm certainly seeing a few yeses in here, and that's fantastic. It's great for students who have studied abroad before. You've been a student internationally. That's wonderful. But you will be new to the Queen's program, which is why it's so wonderful that you're coming out to our sessions to get fully versed. And for students who haven't been on exchange, wow, that's really exciting. I was definitely one of those students. The first day that I stepped foot in an airport was the day that I went on exchange by myself. So I hope you don't feel daunted as we move through pre-departure preparations. It's totally okay if you do, but remember that this is often a new experience for a lot of students, and you've got a ton of support backing you. So for those who've studied abroad on exchange before, you might be familiar with some of what we're going to talk about tonight, and some of them might be new, or might all totally be new, and that's okay too. I thought it would be helpful to start off with some basic tenets of what a university exchange entails. So let's go through these bullet points together, and we're going to use these to kind of build a foundation for understanding what exchange means in an academic sense. So when you study abroad on exchange, you are enrolling as a visiting student for at least one semester, maybe a full year, at another university somewhere outside of Canada. You are subject to the academic regulations of your host university and the laws of your host country. And you are still bound by the Student Code of Conduct at Queen's while you participate on the exchange program. So what those two bullet points really mean is you are acting as a representative of Queen's and of your home country, and you are still bound by these rules and regulations. You will enroll in a full-time course load at your host university, and we're going to break down exactly what that means on the next slide. When you are on exchange, your tuition is paid to Queen's, and it covers that full course load. And it is not prorated. That means it's always going to cover a full course load. And finally, when you are on the exchange program, you are responsible for completing your host university courses and aiming to earn the Queen's equivalent of a C letter grade in order to transfer credit. So these are some of the very basics that come along with the exchange program, and we're going to dive into the particularities of these components. Now, I said at the beginning of this session to ask questions towards the end, but for the first couple of slides in this academic section, I am going to kind of pause and ask questions as we go, just to make sure that we're all following along because they kind of build along with each other, these next couple of slides. Okay. So I mentioned that when you're on the exchange program, you are responsible for enrolling in and completing a full course load. That's something that's baked into our exchange agreements with our partners. When we in the International Programs Office are transferring your credit back to Queen's, which is the very mechanism within the exchange program that allows you to continue progressing in your degree program. So very, very important. And when we are transferring that credit, we're looking at your host university transcript. And we are looking at the number of credits that you enroll in at your host university to determine if you complete a full course load. So a question that I get all the time from students is, how many courses do I have to enroll in order to get that full course load? And it's kind of a trick question because we are not concerned with the number of courses you enroll in. We are concerned with the number of credits you enroll in. That's what bullet point 2 says. Transfer credit is not necessarily about the total number of courses you take. It is more about the total number of credits you achieve. The good news is we're going to tell you the exact number of credits that you need to complete at your host university if you want to transfer back a full course load, which is part of the program. And we're going to place that information in a document that we'll be sending you in the next couple of weeks. But that's something that I'll need you to carry with you through the rest of this presentation, that we are looking at the total number of credits you'll be enrolling in at your host university. And let's continue breaking this down. So when it comes to host university course loads, we were wanting to complete, of course, that full course load on exchange. And that is going to allow you to be eligible to receive the equivalent of a full course load in transfer credits from Queen's. So if I break that down and make it very simple, it means that if you complete a full course load, which again, we're talking about credits here, at your host university, then you'll be eligible to receive a full course load of transfer credits back to Queen's. Now, I think most students here are going abroad for a single term exchange, but we've got some students here who are going abroad for a full year. So I have 2 examples to contextualize what I'm talking about. Let's start with the single term example. So we have here an equation that says 30 ECTS at Sciences Po equals 15 units at Queen's. 15 units at Queen's is what we define is the definition for us of a full course load. So again, we're not actually counting courses here, we're counting those credits. And at Queen's, we call credits units. So 15 units at Queen's is what students typically will take every term. And at Sciences Po, what their students take is 30 ECTS. ECTS stands for the European Credit Transfer System. That's what they call their credits. So if a student is going to Sciences Po for 1 term, they need to enroll in 30 ECTS in order to be eligible to receive 15 units in transfer credit from Queen's. If a student is going to Sciences Po for the full year, they need to enroll in 60 ECTS in order to be eligible to earn 30 units and transfer that back to Queen's for that whole academic year. So I hope that that is clear for folks. Does anyone have any questions at this point in time? Great, not seeing anything in the chat, so that seems to be pretty clear. Perfect. So let's continue on learning about transfer credits. The most common question, as I mentioned, that I get is, how many courses do I have to enroll in? So we've debunked that. We're not focusing on courses. We're focusing on credits. We want that full course load worth of credits. The second common question that I get from students is, how is this course going to transfer back to Queen's? It's a really important question, and the great news is there's a very simple answer. Credits are going to transfer in one of 2 ways. They will transfer either as a specified credit or as an unspecified credit. So let's start with the specified credit. Specified credit is defined as a course that transfers, or credit that transfers from a course at a host university, and that course's content is very similar to a course that we offer in the Queen's catalog. So the example we have is also from Sciences Po, and it is a course that was called Contemporary Strategic Issues in World Politics. This was a few years back. And what we did is we had the student talk to their undergraduate chair. So the undergraduate chair is the head professor in the Department of Political Studies. And that head professor works with undergraduate students. And they took a look at the course syllabus. They assessed it for level, they assessed it for content. So they looked at the reading list, the ways in which students were assessed, the weighting of different assignments, those types of things. And they determined that the content of this course was quite similar to one that was offered at Queen's, and that was Paul's 346 development theory. So that's an example of a specified credit, and that happens fairly often. What also happens pretty often is that students will transfer unspecified credit. This is an instance in which there is no direct equivalent taught at Queen's. So what we do is we consult with the departments to determine if this course, which doesn't have an exact match at Queen's, is still a legitimate offering in the discipline. And we've got another example also in politics from Sciences Po. So a few years ago, a student took a course called Narratives of Justice, and the undergraduate chair in politics took a look at it and said, no, we don't offer anything like Narratives of Justice at Queen's, but from what I can tell from the syllabus, this is definitely a political studies course. It looks like this course would sit at the 300 level if it were offered at Queen's. And because we don't have a direct equivalent, we're going to call it unspecified. And instead of that numerical code you see above unspecified, we're going to give that a letter code that says UNS for unspecified. So students will sometimes ask me, is this a bad thing? Is it a bad thing to get an unspecified credit? And my answer is twofold. So the first thing I'll say to a student when they ask me that is, have you taken a look at your degree plan requirements, and are you confident with what you need to earn while you're on exchange, and you understand how this will fit? Because that's always the most important thing, is you know what you need to earn and you kind of know how this fits. But in terms of whether unspecified credit generally is a bad or a good thing, my answer is it's good. The purpose of an exchange program is that you can go to another institution, you can take courses that we don't offer here at Queen's. It's a great way to expand your knowledge in a different subject area, or get a different lens or perspectives. And I've spoken with students in the past who went abroad, took some courses that because they had room in their degree plan, and it completely changed their mind on what they wanted to do with their profession or even graduate school. So this opportunity to take these different courses can be super impactful. And again, it's just very important. And that's why we have at the bottom of the screen here, it is your responsibility, in fact, to discuss your degree plan requirements with your undergraduate chair. So if you are going abroad and taking courses that maybe aren't offered here at Queen's, you know exactly how they're going to work with your degree plan requirements, and you're still on track to graduate. So how are folks feeling about the specified and unspecified credits? Any questions at this time? Not seeing anything come through the chat? That's wonderful. So I want to give you a few more pro tips while we are talking about how particular courses are transferring. Because sometimes students will go abroad and they'll find a really cool course, but that course actually isn't eligible for transfer to Queen's. So I want to give you some pointers, some things to watch out for so that you don't end up in one of those courses, because that's obviously something we want to avoid. We want all of your courses to transfer back. So things to avoid when you're looking at courses at your host university and you're doing that course registration process would be courses that are very practical in nature. So maybe something we might see at the college level, like a course on jewelry making, for instance, which is a true example of what we've seen in the past. Other things you should be avoiding in terms of course registration would be courses that are from a discipline that we don't teach at Queen's. So an example of that would be something like architecture. We don't have a school of architecture at Queen's. That means we don't have professors here who are subject matter experts in architecture, and we would have no one to make an assessment of that course content. So we couldn't transfer a course like that back. The third thing I'll say you should watch out for when you're enrolling in courses is enrolling in courses that are very similar to courses you've already taken at Queen's. Just like if you're staying here at Queen's for a term, you're not going to enroll in and complete a course you've already taken. The same thing applies for transfer credit. We don't want you to be completing courses that are really similar. That specified credit would kind of determine the similarity, because that likely is going to cause problems with the transfer credit process. So hopefully those 3 things will help you as you are starting to engage in course registration with your host university. Okay, so I had mentioned earlier on that we're going to give you more details in a couple of weeks on particularly the things to watch for. There's no way that we're going to expect everyone to do their own independent research and determine, what the minimum grade is that they need, or even be 100% certain on the course load. We want to give that information to you. So we're going to make that part really easy. In a few weeks, our team is going to put together a whole bunch of 1-page PDF documents. They're going to be specific to each of you, and they're going to tell you a few very particular things about the parameters of academics on your exchange. The components I want to highlight tonight are that we will tell you on this document the host university course load that you'll need to complete. And then in the burgundy or red brackets here, we have an example from Korea University. So at that university for a single term, a student would have to complete 15 credits in order to be eligible to transfer back those 15 units in transfer credit at Queen's. The other thing we will tell you is the minimum grade that we require you to earn in your classes when you are abroad on the program. Just because I'm feeling lonely here talking to my computer, I'll ask, does anyone please put yes in the chat if you think that exchange is pass-fail. So like a 50%. If you got 50% or above, you transfer credit. We'll see what people think. So I'm seeing yeses, no's. Yes, no's. They're not coming in as quickly as before, which is, it makes sense for this question because this is the thing you're here to learn. So when it comes to transferring credit, it's kind of both in a way. We do have a minimum requirement, a minimum grade required. So in a sense, you have to get above above that grade to transfer credit. And if you get below, then you won't be able to. But it's not a 50% mark. We're looking for the equivalent of a C. So if you are abroad and you earn the Queen's equivalent of a C, or the equivalent of a C on the Queen's transcript at your host university, then we will transfer the credit. That's a little confusing. So we will tell you exactly what the grade is at your host university. Again, we're trying to take the guesswork out for you. So let's go back to our example of Korea University. The minimum grade, the equivalent of a Queen's C at Korea University is a 63% or a D+. So again, you're going to get this document and it's going to be particular to you and to the school you're going to, and you'll be able to hang on to it throughout the course of your exchange. We also, in this document, are going to tell you any specifics that we know of your host university. For instance, on everyone's academic parameters of exchange document, we're going to say that you have to complete your exams at or with your host university. I'm saying with because I know things are looking a bit different with virtual studies. But certainly with your host university. So Queen's does not proctor exams. But we might have other specifics that we learned through working with the partner or from past students who studied there, and we'll tell you this information as well. We'll also give you some general pointers on academic planning. So independently, you will take on this academic planning. We have hundreds of degree plans in the Faculty of Arts and Science. There's 27 different departments. We don't have a clear-cut pathway for everyone. So we're going to give you all of the basic information that you need, and then you're going to work with the relevant folks to put this plan into action. So here are some of the tips that we'll share with you on the academic parameters of exchange document. The first is we'll remind you that it is the relevant academic units within the Faculty of Arts and Science that determine how credit is transferred and can advise students on their degree plan requirements. This means that there are undergraduate chairs that I mentioned earlier. So those are the professors that you can consult with about your degree plan. And there may even be other professors or staff members who will work on advising you for transfer credit. So we'll tell you who those folks are in the various departments, and those are the people you're going to work with to determine how the courses you're looking at your host university are going to work with your degree plan. We also will tell you on this academic parameters of exchange document that transfer credits may count towards the completion of your overall degree requirements, but not necessarily the completion of your plan requirements. And that's why it's really important for you to have a good understanding of what your plan requirements are And your undergraduate chairs, again, are the folks who can help you understand what they are. So if you're feeling a bit confused or a little muddled on what those might be, I do recommend reaching out to your department and setting up a meeting with your undergraduate chair so you can walk through your plan, you can be fully versed in what you need to do while you're abroad and the kinds of courses you should be looking for. So I just want to pause for a second and ask if there's any questions at this time. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions come through the chat. I know that can take a while to type out, so I'll kind of keep an eye on that. But I want to transition us now into talking about how to take all of this knowledge that I've given you and put it into action, because that's probably what some of you are starting to think about. This is good to know, Haley, but what do I do with it? Well, don't worry, that part is coming up now. Our team has built something called the Transfer Credit Package. It's about a 5 or 6 page PDF document. It's completely, oh, there is a question. So I'm going to pause before I dive into this transfer credit package here. So Jordan is asking, does the last point mean that a PALS credit, for example, could count towards our arts degree, but not our PALS major? That's a great question, Jordan. Thanks for that. So, and the point of that last bullet, let me go back here for a second, is to emphasize that you'll need to talk to your undergraduate chair about exactly how that will count. So the IPO doesn't have academic advisors on staff, so we're not able to give you that that level of detail. We can talk to you kind of about our work with departments and how departments determine the transferability of credits and how they transfer. But your department is also going to oversee your plan requirements, and they're going to tell you how that fits. So I would say it's really important to have a chat with them. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so now let's dive into this action plan I've been talking about. So we're going to be sending you tomorrow something called the Transfer Credit Package. It's a few pages, it's a PDF document, pretty simple to get through. There's frequently asked questions. There's a timeline that you can follow to kind of figure out where you are in the program and what you should be doing for your transfer credit planning. There is a contact list, and we keep that regularly updated, so you'll know exactly who you reach out to if you've got questions about transferring credit. And then there's 2 forms that you have to complete. So you have a pre-exchange transfer credit form and a post-exchange transfer credit form. Before you go on exchange, you're going to use the pre-exchange transfer credit form to have any of your core or option plan courses that you're hoping to complete at your host exchange university assessed by your undergraduate chair. So if you've looked at your plan, you're familiar with it, you know you've got a couple of courses from that plan that you want to complete while you're abroad, those are the courses that we want you to talk to your transfer credit advisor about before you go, or depending on your host university, you might not get your syllabi until you actually arrive. So even if it's the first week or so that you're on campus, you can email with them, you can meet with them on Zoom or Teams, and you can have a chat with them that way. But before you finalize your enrollment with your host university, you should have this conversation so you understand if you take the courses that you think will be helping you with those plan requirements, that you know how they're going to transfer. In order to have that conversation, you need to provide your transfer credit advisor with syllabi and fill in this form and ask them for an evaluation. They'll provide that back to you, and then you'll have a clear understanding of what will happen if you complete that course and how that's helping you with your degree plan progression. So hopefully that's pretty helpful. And hopefully that kind of answers some of the questions and addresses some of the concerns you might have at this pre-departure stage. There's also the post-exchange transfer credit form, as I mentioned, and this is something that you'll complete after exchange, as the name suggests. You'll complete this form if your courses changed while you were on the exchange program. So if you had to drop a course, pick up a new course, something changed and you didn't have it assessed because maybe it wasn't that plan requirement, or if you didn't have access to the syllabi in time to have it assessed. Sometimes that happens as well, and because those are logistical difficulties, that means that you need to have the course assessed after you've already completed it. So you're going to follow very much that same process that you would with the pre-exchange transfer credit form. It's a PDF fillable. You can fill this out on your computer. You'll send it along with your syllabi to your transfer credit advisor. And again, our package tells you who that person is. And then when that's all complete, they'll send you the signature back. You will forward that on to the IPO, and we will use this document, and we will use your pre-exchange transfer credit form. And we will also use your host university transcript. And then we will do some work and figure out what all of this means for your transfer credits. Sometimes we pull you in if we've got some questions or if there's some choice kind of in how things are arranged. And then we produce something called the Statement of Transfer Credits, which is a one-page PDF document that shows you how we transferred the credits back. So that is a very, very broad overview of how the transfer credit planning will work before, during, and after exchange. Are there any questions at this time about these forms? I'm going to make two other notes if folks are kind of typing questions into the chat here. So it's very common for students to use the post-exchange transfer credit form to have elective courses assessed. So again, if you are confident in what your degree plan requires, you know that you are going abroad to do some elective courses, and you know that they don't meet those bad criterion that we want to avoid, then you can have your elective courses assessed afterwards with the post-exchange transfer credit form. So Aslin is asking in the chat, if we got an email with confirmation already from the head, do we have to do it again? No, Aslin, no, that's great. That's what we need. We just need some confirmation from the undergrad chair. The key thing here is just ensuring that that course syllabi hasn't changed. So if you were on the program last year, you got something assessed, just revisit that syllabi, make sure that it's still the same, because your undergraduate chair could always ask to see that again. And we just want to make sure everything is nice and accurate for them. So hopefully that answers that question. The other note I wanted to make on the transfer credit forms that is quite important is I'll answer the question, do I have to use one form per department, or should I put courses from many departments on one form? Because we will always see it one way or another. The preference of the IPO and the preference of the departments that we work with is that you use an individual form for each department. So if you are going abroad to take, let's say, one history course and two politics courses, you would use one form for the politics courses, and then you would use one form for the history courses. Hopefully that's pretty clear too. Okay. So it's great that you know how to use the forms, but I want to give you a few tips on meeting this transfer credit advisor as well. So I've used the term transfer credit advisor, and I've used the term undergraduate chair a little bit in this session. Hopefully you're familiar with the term undergraduate chair, because as I mentioned earlier on, this is the professor in your department that is meant to provide guidance to undergraduate students, so you can seek their counsel if you're not sure if you're progressing in the right way, or if you've got some issues or concerns. Very often, the undergraduate chair, who's providing counsel on your degree plan progression, and the transfer credit advisor are one and the same. That's, I would say, the majority of departments have the same person fulfilling both roles. But there are some departments where there's another staff member, or there's another faculty member or professor who is the transfer credit advisor. So an example of that would be the Department of History, where there's an undergraduate chair and there's a transfer credit advisor. So there's fewer departments that have that set up. Regardless, this package that we're sending you will tell you specifically who to contact for your transfer credit advising. So you'll use that package to determine who your transfer credit advisor is. You will tell your advisor who you are. So you include your student number, obviously, email from your Queen's email account, tell them the level of studies you're at, so year 3 or year 4. Tell them where you're going on exchange and how long you'll be abroad. All of that information is very important so that they get the complete picture of who you are. And then, of course, you will ask them to review your plan for exchange by presenting this pre or post-exchange form. And the most important part is that you download the course syllabi from your host university website, because they can't make an assessment unless they see that syllabi. Of course, hold on to your records and make sure that you send those into the International Programs Office as well. Okay, any questions on these kind of steps that you're taking, these action steps? Because we're going to shift gears now and we're going to talk a little bit about some more general academic considerations when you're on the exchange program. So I'm not seeing anything come into the chat. Oh, here we go. We've got a question from Kate. Great question, Kate. It says, when would you normally submit the pre-departure form? That's an excellent question. The trick with the exchange program is that we have many great individual students in many different individual degree plans going to many different partners. This means that you are all on slightly different timelines. I recommend as soon as you can start accessing the courses, and usually that's around course registration. So that's usually when I would recommend you start working on those pre-exchange transfer credit forms once you've got that information. Because then you can always get a bit of your initial planning done. You've got maybe, plan A going, and then down the road, just like here at Queen's, you might opt to change a course, and you can always go back to your transfer credit advisor via email, get everything checked out with them if it is a change that's impacting your degree plan progression, and you can do that. So it can be back and forth. There isn't an exact date. There's not an exact time, and I wouldn't say that it's something that happens all at once. It's something that can happen periodically as you are moving through the exchange program. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. I'm going to shift us into talking more generally about some really important things, academic things that you need to keep in mind when you are on the exchange program. So of course, I need to start off by talking about grades and say with an emphasis here with our exclamation point that grades count. They do matter on exchange, but we are not transferring your host university grades back to Queen's. So that's really important to take away. As we mentioned, the minimum grade that we, I think I might see another, nope, I don't see another question, sorry. So the minimum grade that we need to see to transfer credit to Queen's is again that level C. So that's on the Queen's scale. You'll need to earn the equivalent of that on your host university scale. We're going to tell you what that is when we send the academic parameters of exchange document. Grades count for a few reasons here. So obviously you need to hit that minimum, but we're hoping you'll aim higher. And that's because if you're thinking about applying to graduate school, medical school, or law school in the future, which we see students do every year after they participate on exchange, it's very likely that those schools, when they're looking at your application, are going to want to see all of your post-secondary transcripts. So it's highly, highly important that you are still aiming to hit that academic performance that you normally do at Queen's. Now, as I mentioned, the cumulative GPA from your host university does not factor into your Queen's record at all. Instead, on your Queen's transcript, what you're going to see for your transfer credit is in place of that grade that you normally see, you'll see a little notation that says TR, and that stands for transfer credit. So you'll receive the transfer credit from exchange on your Queen's transcript, but not the grades. It's also important to note that every school uses a different grading system, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute when I talk about academic difference. I just really want to emphasize here how many students we see go through the exchange program and then continue on to, again, medical, law school, graduate school. Often those schools are looking at an international learning experience very positively. Of course, I'm speaking generally, not for any particular school or university. But that was my experience. I participated in graduate school after exchange, and it worked out quite well for me. And even recently, a few months ago, I was writing reference letters and being a reference check for a lot of students who were applying for these opportunities. So I just want to encourage you that even though this looks a little bit different than what it might look like on your transcript if you stayed at Queen's, it is another opportunity to really stand out and differentiate your undergraduate experience. Now, I was talking about differences in grading. Let's get into some of these academic differences. Education systems look really different around the world. When I was an undergraduate student, I studied in Ghana and I studied in Scotland. And of course, I earned my undergraduate degree here in Canada. But when I was on exchange, I definitely noticed how there were different learning styles and different expectations as well, and different kinds of academic cultures. So I really hope that you are going to embrace difference when you're on the program, because that's going to make this a smooth and hopefully really enjoyable and meaningful experience for you. A piece of advice we can give you is not to look for the Queen's academic style, because you did sign on for a different experience. Something we hear often from students when they study at our partners is that contact hours are less. So that means that the time that you spend with your professor or your teaching assistant is less. This means you may be required to do more self-guided learning. And that's an opportunity to develop some new skill sets or hone some skills that you don't use maybe to the same degree at Queen's, such as really being accountable and sticking with time management strategies. We want to encourage you to give yourself some time to settle in academically. As Arunima was saying, it's going to take time for things to all fall into place. There is a transition, so be patient and be kind with yourself. Grading systems can be much lower than what we see at Queen's, and this is especially true in a lot of our UK partners, and I know there's lots of folks here going to the UK. So when I studied in Scotland, I remember getting a paper back and nearly having a panic attack. I lined up to go and visit my prof during their office hours because I was really confused why I scored so low on this paper. And when I went into their office hours, they said, "Congratulations, Haley, you did a really great job. This was one of the top marks." And I was baffled until they explained to me, they knew I was an exchange student, that my home university has a much higher, or has a slightly higher minimum pass grade than when I was experiencing at that Scottish institution. So my grade was a little bit lower because they were operating on a different scheme. And we do typically get a few emails and sometimes phone calls every year, kind of feeling a bit worried about having that experience. And it's as simple as saying, "Hey, remember at orientation when we talked about these different grading systems?" And then it kind of kicks in for students. So please, please do remember this as well if you're going abroad and you get a grade back that you're not used to seeing. And finally, European institutions may provide, and this is general, this could be at many institutions around the world, but you may find at your host university that there's less guidance than North American institutions typically provide. So independence is really required and encouraged. Exams on exchange are also something that could be quite different. So you must write all of your exams at your host university. If you depart early, then you're going to assume risks associated with this decision. So obviously, this is speaking more to pre-COVID times. We'll be with you if there's any kinds of adjustments with exams at host universities, and we'll be there to kind of guide you through those processes. Please know, though, that Queen's does not proctor exams on behalf of exchange partners. And finally, exams at exchange partners can be quite different than what you may be used to here at Queen's. For instance, one exam could be worth anywhere from 80 to 100% of your final grade. So that's those different skill sets I was talking about, pulling those out to prepare for an exam of that nature. Exams could be oral, so that means you might be asked to stand in front of your class and verbally reply to your professor, and they'll assess you on that. We've had students have that experience before. Or exams could be large projects or papers. It really can vary depending on the partner. But these are all exciting opportunities to really embrace a new challenge and, again, have a different experience than you'd be used to here in Canada at Queen's. So I want to start to wrap up and shift gears once again and give you a couple of important academic regulations to remember. I'm not going to go into great detail about this. You'll be able to review this PowerPoint and pull these up if they do appear in your exchange journey, but it's important that you know where to reference them. So you can access these on the Arts and Science website. Regulation 3.7 is an arts and science academic regulation that says that a maximum of 6 units from courses offered by other faculties or schools at Queen's may be counted towards the program and or plan requirements of any degree in the Faculty of Arts and Science. So the important thing to note here is that maximum of 6 units. And we've got some examples down here. So that is a cap for your degree plan requirements. So when you're picking courses for your host university, remember that this applies to transfer credits. And this is something, if you think is going to interfere or intersect with your exchange, that you should talk about with your undergraduate chair. And of course, we want to refer you to Regulation 12.3 if you have any questions about the Dean's Honor List. Now, sometimes students do have a bit of difficulty when they are in a new environment, as Arunima was mentioning. And we just want to make a quick note about reaching out for support if you feel like you're in a bit of trouble. We don't want you to make a poor decision if you're on your own or if you're feeling isolated. We really want to arm you with helpful advice so that you can make good decisions in your circumstances. And we know that you've got those skill sets and capabilities. We just want you to know you've got the support system too to make those decisions. So if things are not feeling right, whether that's academic or personal, please send me an email. That's what I would really hope you would do. I can help connect you with resources. We can have a meeting virtually and chat things out. But there is a team here that cares. There is a team at your host university of exchange professionals that care. And there's a lot of resources, as Arunima was saying. So please, if you remember a few things from tonight, I hope this is one you'll remember, that I do want you to reach out if you're feeling like you're struggling on the program. Queen's is always going to respond when you ask for help. So let us know. And we also have a network of individuals we work with that are partners who are ready and available to help as well. I spend my days emailing with them. They're fabulous people. They can't wait to host you next year. We're all eager to host exchange students again. So know that you've got this network of support right behind you. So I want to end our time together by talking about what comes next. And I'm recognizing that we're cutting it quite close. Again, this session is being recorded, so if you do need to leave, we are at the end of the session. That's completely okay. I would recommend that you know, when you get the recording tomorrow, just come back and watch some of the questions, because some of these questions might be really helpful for you in your planning. But let's talk about your next steps. So some of these have already passed. We can actually tick these boxes off, but let's walk through this together, and then I'm going to open the floor to some questions. So after this session ends, in terms of exchange, the next thing that will happen is you'll receive your orientation slides and your transfer credit package. And we're also going to include links to some of the resources that Arunima spoke about. Then, well, we've already done this, let's say, you've attended your OCASP, your off-campus activity safety policy town hall. And that was on March 13th. If you did not attend that town hall, you should have received an email from us asking you to watch the recording and do a small quiz so we can account for your attendance. Of course, we've got Exchange Connect coming up. That's next Tuesday if you are in the Kingston time zone, and we're so excited. It's the first time we're holding this virtually. At this session, you're going to get a broad overview of the student experience on Exchange. So we're going to go into more depth about things like your host university application and what the actual experience is like for a student, you know, at a host university, and returning too. We cover everything. And the great news is you don't have to listen to myself or another staff member. You get to hear everything from a student who was recently on the program. So it's one of the best parts of pre-departure preparations, and I really hope you'll attend. Somewhere in the midst of this, it might be like today, it might be next week, it could be in 2 weeks, but you will soon be receiving, if you haven't already, something called an application prompt. That's just an email from me. I call it the application prompt, and it's an email that says, congratulations, you've been nominated, and your next step is to apply to your host university. And then I'll give you lots of resources, lots of information on how to do that, and contact information for your host university as well. Then you will move on to that next task, which is completing your application by the due date. At this point, something fantastic happens on the exchange program, and you start to work more closely with your host university as you continue with pre-departure preparations, and a little bit less with the IPO. We're always here, but you'll start to work more closely with them after you submit your application. Of course, we want you to adhere to that final guidance while you are awaiting your acceptance. So after you submit your application, we want you to keep following that guidance we've given you. Then you'll start to work directly with your host university. Around this time, you'll begin your transfer credit planning with your undergraduate chair, your transfer credit advisor, so your department. This can happen when you're completing the application. Sometimes host universities want to see those courses listed, so I would say start it then. Sometimes host universities will say, nope, you're gonna do course registration 2 months after you're accepted. So that might be the best time to start your transfer credit planning. So it's gonna look different for every student, but that's gonna happen somewhere in the middle of your pre-departure planning. Around the middle of May, we're down on the third last check box here. Around the middle of May, our team is going to do an academic and financial check for continued eligibility. What this means is we're going to review your internal Queen's record, just like we did when you applied, to make sure that you're continuing to meet the eligibility requirements for exchange. And usually that's an all clear and we continue to move students along. But if we see anything that worries us, we'll reach out to you and we'll have a conversation. And then, like I was saying, in the next couple of weeks, you'll be receiving from us an academic parameters of exchange document. That's a 1-page PDF that outlines everything we talked about earlier. And of course, very, very importantly, you are required to complete your off-campus activity safety policy, which is that online risk management module, by July 1st. This means not only do you have to complete it, but it also has to be approved by the university by July 1st. So while we have July 1st here on the screen, what we send to you in the email is actually June 1st is what we're suggesting you aim to complete your part of this. And then that gives the university 4 weeks to process your record and make sure everything maps out. That's really important because there's only a few people who are working on processing those documents, and they're doing so for hundreds of students across a couple of different faculties. So that's why we're telling you to get that in earlier. So hopefully that helps. A couple of quick notes on this little timeline. It's a little deceiving because this really shouldn't be linear. Maybe I need to change up the shape of it or something, because different things are going to happen at different times for different folks, again, based on what you're studying and where in the world you're going. So don't panic or be alarmed if you've got a friend who's already completed their transfer credit planning and you haven't even started, or someone's already applied and you haven't been contacted by our team yet. Don't worry, remember that we are kind of orchestrating things in the background here to keep you all on track. And the final note I'll make about this timeline is you'll notice that things kind of teeter off towards early in the summer term, around June, July. So of course the IPO is still here, but at that point in time, you're going to be working more closely with your host university. They're going to be giving you guidance on things like housing, on really important things like, of course, your academic registration. They can answer questions about study permits. So that's kind of where I was talking about that transition. So that's all to come. That's something to very much look forward to. So I think I've talked enough for our session today. I've definitely dominated the conversation there. And I'd like to turn the floor over to all of you to ask questions. As I mentioned, if you don't have questions or if you don't feel comfortable asking your questions here, you can always send us an email. We'll answer that tomorrow or next week. But you're welcome to put questions in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, and remember this is being recorded, you are very welcome to turn your mic on and ask some questions that way as well. And I will hang out here until folks have funneled out and all of the questions have been addressed. And just while I wait for folks to ask questions, I'll just say one more time that, again, it's a great pleasure to be here with you and to help support you on this exciting opportunity. All right. So Kate has asked in the chat, what does the application to the host university usually entail? That's such a great question, Kate. Thank you. So we're going to talk probably more about this at Exchange Connect, but I'm happy to give you kind of an overview. I'm laughing a little bit because it's very much along the lines of what I've been saying all night. A host university application will differ from student to student depending on what their host university is. Sometimes they are super simple, like an online form that students complete, and they'll upload their transcript and that will be that. Sometimes they're quite complex. Some of our partners need to see things like a health form that's been completed by a doctor, or a financial statement from a bank. And usually those are because of kind of requirements that might come from the government, or might be tied to Well, okay, that was a moment. I'm back, but thanks for everyone who stuck around. Sorry, my Wi-Fi dropped out there. Hopefully our recording stuck. So as I was saying, it's really, really going to vary, but I like to try and give students 2 weeks, and I like to try to nominate all students before exams start, because I remember being a student and I would not want to try to put together an application during exams. Exams are enough in April. So hopefully that answers your question, Kate. Are there any other questions? I'm sorry if I missed anyone that little glitch there. So I'm not seeing any questions come through. As I mentioned, I'm happy to wait here if folks are kind of formulating questions. Thanks, Jordan. But you are very welcome to head off. You don't need to hang around if you don't have any more questions. Thanks, Kate. As I mentioned too, our office does have an online booking system. So if you wanted to book an individual appointment, I'm happy to meet with you. Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Shutong. So I'm happy to meet with you online if you want to kind of dive into your own case file and try to sort things out. We can definitely do that. So I see it's G and Lillian. Do either of you have any final questions? I think I'll end the recording now.